Hey there, welcome back to Clay Brick Road with myself, Joanna. It has been a couple of weeks, but don't despair. I have been working on these projects, including a new one which I'll be telling you about in an upcoming video. One of the things that I have talked about with you is about the fairy house and the pond. Now, you've seen in a previous episode where I've been working with making dragonflies, lily pads and a frog, and that will all be coming together to part of this pond. Now, it also includes a bridge, and it's going to be made out of resin. So let's go and have a look and watch and see how I did it and see how this pond turned out. The materials I've got here to create this resin pond are this hot glue gun, and I've got some acetate and a glass tile. So what I'll actually do from this is create and stand up the acetate on the pond shape that I want, and then I'll use the hot glue gun to glue it down, ready to pour the resin in. Now, to get the shape of the pond, I've got my glass tile and I've got it flush up against the wall and the steps of the fairy house. So this means what I can do is with the hot glue gun, I can outline where I want the pond to do. So it's going to be pretty structured shape near the actual house, and then turn into more of a pond curvier shape when it breaks away from the house. So here I've got the shape. I'll put that aside and I'll move the fairy house so that we can actually assemble the acetate on the glass tile. So I'm just going to clean up the glue a little bit. Obviously it's dried now, so I will have to put down some more glue. But here's some music while we watch this happen. So now I've got the shape sorted, I'm just going to go around with the glue gun to seal the acetate to the glass tile. This will just make sure that when the resin is poured in that none of it escapes and that it stays contained within the shape. Now that I have the shape that I want, I'm going to be using a variety of micro powders to sprinkle in the bottom so that it can make sort of a nice effect once the resin is poured in. Now I'm going to use a variety of shades of the blue-green family, and that will just make a nice little base for the pond. Now I'm just sort of sprinkling and scattering it in, but once I kind of get to the last little colours and powders that I want, I'm actually going to try and cover the bottom, and to do so I will just shake it and it will come up with a really pretty coloured pattern of the actual micro powder base. So once that's done, and it does look pretty, I'm going to be preparing the epoxy resin. Now to do so, I'm going to use a 1:1 ratio epoxy resin, and this is one that I've got here. So mainly it's a matter of pouring in the equal amounts of both bottles and then stirring it up. So I'll go ahead and do that, and here's some music while you watch it happen. Now you can see here that the epoxy resin is clear, so I need to add a few inks to it in order to make the colour I want. So again, I'm using the shades of blue and green. So what I'll do is I'll add the inks and I will stir it up. Once I've got it all stirred, I will put it into the mould that I've made, and then we'll be ready to let it set. So it's looking like a really nice blue colour as we pour it in here. And what I'll need to do is use the stick to make the edges, make sure it's all around the edges, but someone's head got in the way, aka mine. So what we'll do is we'll have a look at the final colour right here. So it's been nearly a week and I have been looking at it throughout the week and it's still very tacky and soft. So I'm not sure what's gone wrong here, whether it's the inks that I used, whether there was an uneven amount of A and B, or it hasn't been combined properly. But what I'm going to continue to do is I'm going to persevere and continue to use it and see if I can actually make it better and put it in place and let it cure over more time. Now, one thing I really do love about it is its colour. It really has a vibrant blue on it. So I'm going to spend a lot of time here now and I'm going to fast forward it and put it to music as I try to get it apart. All right, here we go. Now that I have it off, I'm just really glad that I put the micro powders down because it created a kind of barrier between the glass tile and the resin, so it was able to be a little bit easier to come off than if I hadn't. Now I'm going to have to try and get the glue off and clean it up a little bit so that we can get it ready to put into the fairy house. I've cleaned it up here and it's ready to go onto the fairy house. I also use a flame just to get rid of any sort of external bubbles. This is a trick that we use with resin. Alrighty, so I have my fairy house here. It's still not pinned down at this stage yet, but I have a feeling when I add the tacky pond that will help it do that. So here it is, and it really does fit quite well, so I'm pretty happy with that, even if it doesn't come off my fingers. I'm just going to secure it in place and make sure it's right up against the wall and the steps, but it's looking pretty good. Pretty happy with that, even if it is tacky. Now it's a couple of days later and it's time to decorate the pond. Now at Bunnings I've picked up these little rocks as well as some Gorilla Glue. Now this Gorilla Glue I have never used before, but it comes with a secret surprise that I'll soon find out. So in the meantime, let's speed this up, add some music and watch as I decorate this pond with rocks. Now I'm going to add at this stage some of the lily pads and leaves that I've made for the pond just to see where it fits and make sure that it's looking good. I'm also going to want to make a bridge, so I'm only doing the back section of the pond at the moment just to see and figure out how I'm going to make this bridge happen. dry, and do you remember me talking about how the glue had a surprise in store for me? Well, the glue expanded. It created some sort of reaction where it started to bubble and it expanded. But what really made it exciting is that it created a type of grout for the rocks that I had. So it actually makes them look better, and what I can actually do is glue some foliage or whatever onto those grout bits to hide the actual glue itself. But what a nice surprise is that. I had some extra rocks here that had the glue on it, so I'm just peeling that off at the moment. So as I mentioned, I wanted to add some foliage for in between the rocks to cover up that glue that has given us that grout effect. So what I've done is I've got this sort of fake moss that's a green-grey colour, and what I'm doing is I'm just cutting it up a little bit finer just so that it adds a little bit easier in between the rocks. Now off camera, what I actually did do is I added some other green fake foliage, and that was just to give it a little bit more of a texture, and it actually just sort of made it a little bit more multi-dimensional. So here you can see that I've started applying the glue around the rocks, and then I'll just sort of grab this fake foliage and just sort of scatter it on. It did take quite a little bit of time to perfect this, as some of the resin was still slightly tacky, but what it's also done is it sort of given it a natural look, because foliage will actually spill on to the actual pond. So it actually ended up looking quite okay, but it was quite an interesting process, and I was able to learn a few things along the way. Now I'm going to put the rest of the foliage aside, as I'll use that later, because it's time to focus on the bridge. Now, one thing I really wanted with this bridge is to use a natural material, whether it be wood or something else. So I went outside my house, and one thing that was just in my backyard was a paperbark tree. Now, this paperbark tree was perfect to be able to get a section of it and to use it as a bridge. So what I did is I found sort of a long square section, and I actually soaked it in water. This was for two reasons. One, if there was any bugs or spiders in it, and the other is to be able to bend it. So what I kind of needed to do, and what you can see here, is that I've taken the bark out of the water while it's damp, and I'm gently going to bend it into the shape that I want. Now I'm going to have to let it dry in that position, so what I've got to do is find a way to keep it in that position while it dries. And how I do that is I have this tool with clips on it, so let's see how it went. Alrighty, now I've got it in position. If I turn it around, you can see that I have formed an arch in the wood, and by doing that I'll leave it like that and let it dry, and it will dry in that shape. Now if we go back to the pond, we've got to now put our bridge on our pond, and we will see how it fits. Now it's a little bit long on the edges, so we might just either cut them off or just bend them across, and then I will glue it down. I'll use the same glue as I did for the rock, so it forms that grout look, and we'll go from there. Alright, let's speed things up and see how it looks. Now that we've got the bridge attached, what we need to do is finish the rocks around the edge. So I'm going to go ahead and glue them again with this same Gorilla Glue, and glue them down around the edges. This again is going to make that grout look, which again I'm going to add the foliage and finish it off that way. So let's get cracking and make that happen. Alrighty, so the glue's still wet, but the rocks and the bridge are in place. So all we need to do is do some little touches around the foliage and wait for the glue to dry to create that grout look. Using the magic of video, let's skip ahead and see what the pond looked with the glue dry. And here we are, and you can see what I mean about that grout look. It's filled in the gaps there and has sealed in the rocks. Alrighty, so what we need to go ahead and do now is add the foliage and the decorations to the pond. As we come to the end of the decorating of the pond, let's have a look at the final product. We can see the house is looking still quite bare, but what a pond. We've got the paper bark bridge, which I'm really amazed at how it's turned out. It's turned out better than I thought it could be. We have our polymer clay water lilies and lily pads, and you can even see a little dragonfly there and another one there, looking very nice and chill out on their pond. Over this side, we've got our cute little frog and another dragonfly. So with all the foliage and the rocks and everything, this is one very good looking pond. So thank you very much for joining me on this adventure. This is the pond for the fairy house, and I hope you keep joining me to see what more adventures we've got coming up.